All right, well, here we are for chapter 3. Let me share my screen. All right, chapter 3. We're going to talk about stakeholders, right? Hold on, make some little note here. Stakeholders. That's when we talk about stake, S-T-A-K-E. You know, if you swapped the E and the K, the E, put the E before the after the T, it's very different. It's steak, as in something that you would eat. Anyway, stakeholders. What is a stakeholder? We talked about that a little bit. We're kind of dive a little deeper in that, right? This lecture. The term stakeholder essentially is a variant of the more familiar and traditional concepts of stockholders or shareholders, the investors in or owners of a business. So what is a stake? It's an interest in or a share in an undertaking. That's basically the definition. A stake can also be a claim. And we'll get into the more details about stakeholders here in a second. So Harrington and Wicks, consulting firm, they have contended that stakeholders in general desire utility, or essentially utility is the same as benefits associated with 1, the actual goods and services companies provide, 2, organizational justice, or also known as fair treatment, 3, affiliating with companies that exhibit practices consistent with the things they value, and 4, getting a good deal from the company based on the opportunity cost, or opportunity cost is another expression of kind of the value of your time they spend compared with the value they receive from other companies. So pretty somewhat straightforward there. More on stakeholders. Stakeholders may be affected. There's a lot of verbiage in this chapter. I'll let you know, like, the most important slides that basically kind of summarize everything that I'm trying to get across. Stakeholders may be affected by the actions, decisions, policies, or practices of the business firm. These stakeholders may also affect the organization's actions, decisions, policies, or practices. This is basically essentially saying that all the people who could be impactful in a business and their importance, and how a company must be aware of all of these different organizations, different types of people, and different views and claims that they might have for the company. Who are the business stakeholders? This is a very important slide. There's about 3 or 4 slides I think are probably the most important. This is a very important one right here. Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, has asserted that my customers are my stakeholders. So you might think stakeholders as like the investors, okay? They are a stakeholder, more of a shareholder, but he says, my customers are my stakeholders, my partners are my stakeholders, my employees are my stakeholders. I have other stakeholders too. I even consider the communities that we live in are stakeholders. The environment is a stakeholder. We cannot do business without that. So essentially everybody out there can potentially be a stakeholder or have some type of an interest in a business. That's kind of the point here with talking about stakeholders. And there's a stakeholder view. Let's say you as a stakeholder, what essentially is that view you could have? The stakeholder view basically encompasses numerous different individuals and groups that are embedded in the firm's internal and external environments. Internal would be everything the company is directly in control of. External could be kind of things that extend outside of their 4 walls or outside of what they're doing, but can have an impact in their business. And there's also primary and secondary stakeholders. The primary stakeholders, the primary social stakeholders, they have a direct stake in the organization and its success, and therefore are not and are the most influential. Okay, examples would include the shareholders, people who own stock in the company, the investors, people who have invested in the company, same as a shareholder. But employees and managers, they're there in the business day to day. The customers, they're the ones who basically kind of support the business. The local communities where the business is. The suppliers, people who supply either the raw materials or any type of support to the company as well, and other business partners. So those are people who are kind of like on the front lines, are the most involved with the company. They're the primary social stakeholders. And there's the secondary social stakeholders. What are those? That could be the government and regulators. There could be a change in the laws that can impact a company. The civic organizations as well, social activist groups, which could be like, we'll get into like kind of like the PETA and the ASPCA, those type of groups, Greenpeace, are also they're stakeholders, but more secondary social stakeholders, because they're not there in the day-to-day business. And then the media and commentators. Media and commentators, they absolutely can be influential and also such secondary social stakeholders. Secondary non-social stakeholders. Actually, so I kind of spoke too soon. So secondary non-social stakeholders. Examples: environmental interest groups, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, PETA, the ASPCA, American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. We'll get into some of these a little bit later and how they impacted McDonald's. These are the secondary non-social stakeholders. Then you got to look at the stakeholders. How legitimate are they? How legitimate are they? How much power do they have? And how urgent do you have to be with your interactions with them? And the big question is, how do managers decide which stakeholders deserve their attention? You know, which ones do you pay the most attention to? Even though you have to pay attention to all of them, but which are the most urgent? The attributes of legitimacy, power, and urgency help us see how stakeholders can be thought of and analyzed in terms of their characteristics. So there's legitimacy. This is that perceived validity or appropriateness of a stakeholder's claim to stake. And there's the stakeholders that are most distant from the firm, such as social activist groups, NGOs, national government organizations, competitors, or the media might be thought to have less legitimacy because they're a little far removed, but they're companies who've been kind of taking some of these situations lightly and end up getting understanding how powerful they are. But for the most part, legitimacy is, you know, how close are you to the company and how much sway do you have in the daily operations. The power, that's basically the ability or capacity of the stakeholder to produce an effect, to get something done that otherwise not be done. Think about, like, you know, if a company wants to unionize, or if employers want to unionize, those employees have power and they can get it done. So they definitely kind of fall in this power category. Another example would be like PETA and fast food, which we'll get into the McDonald's case here a little bit. And then the urgency. That's essentially the degree to which the stakeholders claim on business calls for the business's immediate attention or response. Or, you know, how fast do you have to react to the complaints, to the calls to action. And sometimes, you know, as a business leader, you think, oh, I got this. This is a piece of cake. And then you realize, okay, this thing's getting out of control. I have to be urgent with this. With social media today, the concept of urgency has taken on a new meaning. So then there's three stakeholder approaches, the approaches that a stakeholder can have. There's a strategic approach that essentially views the stakeholders primarily as factors to be taken into consideration and managed while the firm pursues profits for its stakeholders. So strategic approach is like, how do we make money and revenue for this company? There's a multi-fiduciary approach, which is more of a financial view as well, which is they view the stakeholders as more than just individuals or groups that can wield economic or legal power. Management has just as much of responsibility to shareholders and stakeholders. So the management, hey, we have to take care of our shareholders, the people who own stock in the company, the investors. They're just as important as stakeholders. There's some companies years ago, nobody cared about, not as much about stakeholders. It's all about shareholders, about creating shareholder value, creating shareholder wealth. And then that synthesis approach is the business does have a moral responsibilities to stakeholders, but they should not be seen as part of the fiduciary or kind of the financial obligation, where, you know, you definitely have to be cognizant and recognize external stakeholders and kind of stakeholders are kind of intertwined, but the importance should be, they're very important, but the importance should be on the fiduciary side. The three values of the stakeholder model: there's a descriptive value, instrumental value, and the normative value, which will be in the next three slides here. The descriptive value, that essentially just provides the language and concepts that will explain the corporation or organization in the stakeholders' inclusive terms, just kind of a definition, essentially, another definition here. Instrumental value is practicing effective stakeholder management This should lead to the achievement of important business goals such as profitability, stability, and growth. Kind of for the most part, the primary functions of a company. And then the normative value. The stakeholders are seen as possessing value irrespective of their instrumental use to management. So there's that essentially just there's much more than just the financial aspects. This is okay. The most important slides I think to understand these concepts are going to be this one here. Who are the business's stakeholders, right? And then this one here. Another one's come up too, but what the 5 key questions in stakeholder management. 1, who are our organization stakeholders? It's a big question. It's an easy question to ask. It's not the hardest one to answer. And another really important slide is coming here in a second here. What are our stakeholder stakes? What is important to them, right? Who are the stakeholders? What are their stakes or what are important to them? What opportunities and challenges do our stakeholders present to the firm? So where are there opportunities to engage them in a positive way? And also where are the challenges that could be a problem for us down the road? 4, what responsibilities does the firm have to the stakeholders? Important question. 5, what strategies or actions should the firm take to best address stakeholder challenges and opportunities? Basically having a forward-thinking approach to with stakeholders in conjunction in thinking with their primary objectives of the company, and how the company operates and achieves profitability and everything else under that umbrella. McDonald's. We all know McDonald's. Some of you like McDonald's, some of you don't like McDonald's. That's fine. PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. They kind of threw down the gauntlet with McDonald's. PETA was convinced McDonald's was dragging its feet on animal welfare issues, and they went on the offensive. So what do? They pressured McDonald's with tactics. They announced that they wanted significant changes in the requirements. And so in how they were treating animals. So McDonald's basically said, we're going to change how we the care we give to our chickens, the care we give to our egg suppliers. They went from having them in 48-inch cages to 72-inch cages. But still, you know what? PETA was not happy. They did something called unhappy meals. They had these boxes that looked like Happy Meal boxes, but on the inside they had these pictures of animals being slaughtered and put them in McDonald's playland and all that kind of stuff to try to to scare parents and to scare children from going to McDonald's. So McDonald's absolutely has to be aware of PETA in their daily practices. They have to know, okay, this is something that we have to be cognizant of. We have to recognize this. We have to kind of be instead of being defensive, we have to be, slightly offensive with this and know that we have to put out some good messaging about the treatment of animals. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think about it. It's like, here they are, just people are going there eating animal products, but then they want to say, hey, here's how great we treat them, in the process. But it's interesting. My brother used to work for this really famous world famous butcher, and the butcher he was originally going to be a vet because he really cared about animals. And it's just but some people in the food industry are very, very concerned about animals, and they think that animals are the most precious beings out there, but also there to serve people. And it's like it's that slippery slope that you get in of making sure that you take care of the animals the best way you can. Here is another very important slide. So I think it's probably the 3rd or 4th most important slide. So take, for example, there's an Ohio manufacturing firm. Who are their stakeholders? 1, the residents living within a 25-mile radius of the plant. It's very important. Well, it's 1. 2, other residents in the city, stakeholders. 3, residents who live in the path of the jet stream hundreds of miles away, some in Canada, who are being impacted by the acid rain. I don't know if you know how that works. So basically, if you have the pollution that's coming out of the factory, it can go up into the clouds, and those clouds can basically will go north, just basically on the jet stream. And people in Canada could get rain that might be polluted, and it might be damaging, to their crops. 4, the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal government, can be a stakeholder. 5, Ohio's Environmental Protection Division, it's a state government agency similar to the EPA. And number 4, 6, the Sierra Club, their environmental activist group. And 7, the Ohio Environmental Council. So this isn't one manufacturing plant in Ohio. Here's all the things they have to consider and all the potential stakeholders. So what responsibilities does a firm have towards its stakeholders? There's the shareholders. People just want to invest in the company. Their responsibility to them is be profitable, make money. That's it, right? So that's why, if you think about it, when you're in business and you're kind of running a business, you have a lot of considerations, a lot of responsibilities, and you are being constantly in your ear. In one ear, you got the shareholders talking to you. The other ear, you have your employers talking to you. The other ear, you have your customers. Then you have your local community. Then you have your suppliers. So essentially, the responsibilities a firm have towards its stakeholders: 1, shareholders, be profitable. 2, the employees, pay them fair, have good working conditions, strong benefits, trusted leadership, right? 3, the customers. You might want to make sure you have fair prices, safe products, and excellent service. 4, the local community. You're providing jobs, you're providing stability, and you want to have minimal disruption. Because if you have a large company in an area, and then you pull the company, you leave from there, you've basically huge stakeholders, that local community. You have basically kind of done irreparable harm to that local community. And you see it happening all over the country. And then the suppliers, the regular business, and prompt payment. That's kind of what your responsibilities are. There's also the 4 shareholder types. There's a supportive stakeholder, which is high in cooperation. This is kind of, there's a matrix. I was going to attach this, but I didn't include it. It's in the textbook. So 1, the supportive stakeholder, which is high on cooperation, low on potential threat. 2, the marginal stakeholder, low on both potential for threat and potential for cooperation. 3, the non-supportive stakeholder, high potential for threat, but low on potential for cooperation. And 4, the mixed blessing stakeholder, high on potential for threat and potential for cooperation. Oh, by the way, Easter egg, Orange. I live in the city of Orange, okay? That's all you need to know, is I live in the city of Orange. A few more things. Stakeholder culture, what does that mean? There's the agency culture, not concerned with others. I'm just gonna be very selfish and just be very selfish and kind of stick to myself. There's a corporate egoist culture and instrumental culture, focusing mostly on the firm's shareholders as the important shareholders are, and on short-term profit maximization. Once again, kind of just about us. And then the moralist and altruistic culture, morally based and provide the broadest concern for stakeholders. That's the one that I think that's the direction we're absolutely going in with this, with corporations now. Here's a couple good quotes to end this with, and just kind of wrapping around this kind of stakeholder value. This is from Wheeler and Sillenpah, which is a consulting agency. In the future, development of loyal relationships with customers, employees, shareholders, and other stakeholders will become one of the most important determinants of commercial viability and business success. Increasing shareholder value will be best served if your company cultivates the support of all who may influence its importance. So once again, hey, we're all in this together. And last thing is called the Clarkson principle. It's kind of an older principle about kind of on the forefront of stakeholder value. Acknowledge, monitor, listen, communicate, adopt, recognize, work, avoid and acknowledge potential conflicts. These principles serve as guidelines for successful stakeholder management. With that, the quiz will be up here in a second. The quiz should be up. And any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Bye-bye.